Judge rules against black woman stunned when she reveals she's a U.S. attorney. The courtroom was ice cold, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the judgment hanging thick in the air. Every eye was fixed on the woman standing alone at the defense table. Alicia Monroe, a black woman in her early 30s, no jewelry, no makeup, no lawyer, just her, standing straight, her shoulders squared against the weight of a room that had already decided she was guilty. From the moment she walked in, she felt it. The stares, the whispered comments, the smirks from the jury box. To them, she wasn't a professional. She was a poor black woman defending herself in a system built to crush people like her. The white bailiff didn't even meet her eyes when he gestured for her to stand. The courtroom clerk, an older woman with stiff hair and stiff eyes, looked at Alicia like she didn't belong. At the bench sat Judge Robert L. Hartwell, a man whose thinning gray hair was slicked back with authority, his gavel a tool not of justice, but of control. He adjusted his glasses, glancing down at the case file with disinterest before lifting his eyes to Alicia. His gaze was sharp but not curious, just dismissive. "Miss Monroe," he began, his voice slow and patronizing, "are you aware of the gravity of the charges brought against you?" Alicia nodded once, calm and composed. "Yes, Your Honor, I am." Her voice was steady, but her eyes, deep brown, framed by quiet exhaustion, revealed the storm beneath. Pain, frustration, and above all, restraint. Judge Hartwell sighed and leaned back in his chair. "You understand this is a criminal assault case. The victim, Mr. Charles Whitman, is a respected business owner. You've been charged with physically attacking him in a public parking lot, and you're choosing to represent yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor," Alicia repeated. A chuckle broke out from the spectators' bench, just loud enough to be heard, just short of being punishable. The judge didn't react. From across the courtroom, Prosecutor Daniel Merrick stood, a man oozing with self-importance in his tailored suit and gold watch glinting beneath the fluorescence. He cleared his throat theatrically. "Your Honor," he said, "I must object to the defendant's decision to proceed pro se. This case involves significant legal complexity. We're talking about physical assault, witness testimony, potential surveillance footage." "She has the right to defend herself," the judge interrupted, although not in Alicia's defense. He said it more like a warning. "You're making your bed, now lie in it." Alicia said nothing. She'd been here before. Not in this courtroom, not on these exact charges, but in this exact power dynamic. She had sat across from men like Merrick, under the gaze of men like Hartwell, too many times. But never like this. Never as the one being accused. Prosecutor Merrick turned to the jury and smiled as if the verdict was already signed. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a textbook example of uncontrolled aggression. Mr. Whitman was leaving his office late at night. Miss Monroe, angered by a parking dispute, allegedly shouted at him, struck him, and left him on the ground." He paused for effect. "This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate act of violence, a temper lost, a crime committed." Alicia didn't move. She didn't flinch, but inside she burned, because she knew what they were doing. They were painting a picture, a dangerous woman lashing out, violent and unstable. And she couldn't help but notice how no one questioned why a successful businessman had been shouting at her in a dark parking lot. No one asked why the bruises didn't match an assault. No one cared that the surveillance footage conveniently cut off 10 seconds before the incident. The courtroom had fallen into a tense silence as the first witness took the stand. A white woman in her late 50s, dressed in a pale lavender blouse and clutching her handbag like a shield, cleared her throat nervously. Her name was Margaret Ellison, and from the moment she stepped into view, the mood in the room shifted. She looked like someone the jury could trust. She looked like someone who paid her taxes, attended church, and never missed a bake sale. And worst of all, she looked scared. Daniel Merrick, the lead prosecutor, walked up slowly, adjusting his tie with practiced flair. He gave the jury a warm, reassuring smile before turning to Margaret with the gentlest of voices. "Good afternoon, Miss Ellison. Thank you for being here today. I know this must be uncomfortable." Margaret nodded, her lips trembling slightly. "Yes, well, I just want to tell the truth." "That's all we want," Merrick said smoothly, before stepping back slightly to give her space. Now please tell the court what you saw the night of the incident. Margaret inhaled deeply. I was walking to my car in the lower lot behind my building. It was late, maybe around 9:30 p.m. The lights were dim, some of them were flickering, and I heard shouting. When I looked over, I saw a woman, her, she pointed at Alicia without hesitation, standing over a man lying on the ground. A ripple of whispers moved through the courtroom. Merrick nodded solemnly and began pacing slowly. And what did the woman appear to be doing? Margaret hesitated, looking uncomfortable. It looked like she had just attacked him. I mean, I didn't see her hit him, but it was loud, and he was on the ground, and she was just standing there over him. Standing over him, Merrick repeated, drawing the words out for dramatic effect. He glanced at the jury again. Thank you, Ms. Ellison. That'll be all. He turned and walked back toward the prosecution's table with the air of a man who believed he just won the case. But the moment Alicia stood, the air in the courtroom changed. She walked slowly to the witness stand. No theatrics, no emotion, just calm, careful steps. Ms. Ellison, Alicia began, her tone professional. You said it was dark that night? Yes. And some of the parking lot lights were not working? Yes, that's right. And you were? How far away exactly? I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 feet, Margaret said, frowning. In the dark, Alicia confirmed, and about 50 feet away. So you didn't see me make physical contact with the man. Is that correct? Margaret hesitated. No, I didn't actually see, but you assumed, based on the noise and his position on the ground? Margaret's voice lowered. Yes. Alicia paused, looking down at her notepad, then looked back up. Were you able to see what either of us was saying? Could you hear our words? Number, I could only hear yelling. I didn't hear the words. No further questions, Alicia said softly, returning to her seat. Judge Milton barely acknowledged her as he turned to Merrick. Next witness? But Merrick wasn't done. He rose again, full of swagger now, and turned dramatically to face Alicia. Miss Monroe, he said with mocking emphasis, I must admit, you handle yourself well for someone without a law degree. Alicia remained silent, unmoved. But let's not kid ourselves, he continued, walking slowly toward the jury. Reading a few articles on the internet and watching courtroom dramas doesn't make someone qualified to stand here. This isn't about pride. This is about facts. This is about the law. He pivoted, locking eyes with Alicia. You think you're better than us because you've memorized some legal terms? Alicia stood again, slowly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't sneer. But her words hit with the weight of someone who had tasted injustice before. I never said I was better than anyone, she said. But I know my rights, and I know that assuming guilt based on race, income, or lack of representation is not justice. It's prejudice wearing a robe. Gasps fluttered through the room. Even the judge blinked. Merrick, however, only smirked. Prejudice? He scoffed. Miss Monroe, you're not on trial because you're black. You're on trial because there's a victim who says you assaulted him and a witness who saw you standing over his body. Don't turn this courtroom into your personal soapbox. Alicia clenched her jaw, not because she was angry, though she had every right to be, but because no matter what she said, it was like screaming into a void. She had facts. She had logic. But the jury wasn't hearing her. They were watching her, judging her, weighing her demeanor like it mattered more than the truth. The judge cleared his throat, visibly impatient. Miss Monroe, return to your seat. She did quietly, folding her hands in front of her again. Daniel Merrick sat down slowly, his eyes never leaving Alicia. He wore a satisfied grin, as if he'd just landed the final blow. He knew the witness hadn't seen anything. He knew the testimony was circumstantial at best. But he also knew the game. He didn't need facts. He needed doubt. Doubt in a jury trained to believe that a woman like Alicia, black, alone, unrepresented, was always one breath away from violence. And so the courtroom moved forward, one unfair step at a time. The truth wasn't enough. Not yet. Not here. Outside the windows, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the wooden panels. Inside, Alicia sat still, calm, focused, but her hands trembled slightly in her lap. She knew what they were doing. She knew this wasn't about justice. It was about control. And they were doing everything in their power to remind her she had none. The courtroom doors creaked as Officer Gerald Knox entered and made his way to the witness stand. Tall, broad-shouldered, and clad in full uniform, he walked with the kind of authority that needed no announcement. His presence alone was enough to shift the energy in the room. People sat straighter. The jury leaned in. Even the judge appeared more alert. But Alicia Monroe didn't flinch. She kept her eyes fixed on the man who, with just a few words, could twist the truth into a noose. Prosecutor Daniel Merrick rose from his seat with visible confidence. He straightened his cuffs and approached the stand with a swagger born from knowing the deck was stacked in his favor. "Officer Knox," Merrick began, his voice calm and familiar, "you were one of the first responders to the scene the night of the incident, correct?" "Yes, sir," Knox replied, nodding. "And can you tell the court what you observed when you arrived?" Knox nodded again, already rehearsed. "We found Mr. Charles Whitman lying on the ground near his vehicle. He had a bruised arm and a scraped elbow. He appeared shaken, claimed he was attacked." "And did you question Miss Monroe at the scene?" Knox's face hardened. "Yes, we approached her for questioning. She was uncooperative. She refused to answer basic questions, wouldn't even tell us her name until we brought her in." Merrick tilted his head toward the jury. "So she refused to cooperate?" "She invoked her right to remain silent," Knox emphasized, with just enough disdain in his tone to color the words as guilt. Alicia stood, composed as always, but there was a storm behind her eyes. "Objection, Your Honor," she said firmly. "Exercising the right to remain silent is a constitutional protection, not evidence of guilt." Judge Milton didn't even lift his gaze from the file on his desk. "Sustained," he muttered half-heartedly. But the damage had already been done. The words were out. The jury heard them. The implication hung in the air like a bad smell. Merrick didn't miss a beat. "Officer Knox," he continued, "based on your experience, would you say the defendant's behavior that night was suspicious?" Alicia shot up again. "Objection. Speculation." Knox didn't wait. "Yes," he answered. "In my professional opinion, it was absolutely suspicious." This time the judge looked up. "Miss Monroe, I suggest you choose your objections wisely. You're not helping yourself." Alicia took a breath. Her voice was calm, but her jaw was tight. "He's providing a personal opinion to sway the jury, Your Honor. That's not testimony. That's bias." Judge Milton leaned back in his chair, clearly annoyed. "You may be familiar with legal theory, Miss Monroe, but this is a real courtroom, not a textbook. I advise you to start learning the difference." The words sliced through the silence. The spectators chuckled quietly. A juror smirked. One of the clerks actually rolled her eyes. The bailiff coughed, loud enough to almost sound like a laugh. And Alicia stood there, alone in a sea of people who had already decided she was guilty, not because of what she did, but because of who she was. The color of her skin, the simplicity of her clothes, the audacity of her self-representation. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't plead for understanding. She simply sat back down, folding her hands in her lap, her posture straight. But her fingers trembled slightly, hidden beneath the table. Merrick continued his questioning, now emboldened. "And Officer Knox, did Miss Monroe offer any alibi at the scene?" She just asked for a lawyer. Wouldn't tell us anything." "And you found that uncooperative?" "Yes." Alicia couldn't stay silent anymore. She stood again, her voice sharper this time. "Your Honor, the Fifth Amendment gives me the right to remain silent. The Sixth gives me the right to an attorney. Exercising those rights is not refusing to cooperate. It is the very definition of due process." Judge Milton let out a loud sigh, then slowly turned to face her. His eyes were void of empathy. "Young lady," he said, "you clearly enjoy quoting the Constitution, but in this courtroom you need more than quotes. You need sense." Another chuckle, a louder one this time. Someone in the back whispered, "She's digging her own grave." Alicia sat down again, her face expressionless. But inside her chest burned, not from shame, but from the overwhelming weight of being unheard. Every time she opened her mouth to speak truth, the system bent to crush her. Every logical point she raised was brushed aside. Every right she exercised was twisted into guilt. It wasn't just unfair, it was a performance of injustice, and she was the unwilling star. The judge turned to Merrick. "You may continue." Merrick nodded, smugly victorious. He didn't need facts. He had perception. He had the badge, the uniform, the courtroom culture on his side. And Alicia? She had the law. But no one in that courtroom cared. The air in the courtroom had grown heavy, thick with tension, judgment, and something far more dangerous: assumption. Alicia Monroe sat silently at the defense table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale from pressure. Her case, layer by layer, had been reduced to a fragile skeleton of half-truths and biased testimonies. The prosecution had no hard evidence, just a nervous witness who couldn't see clearly in the dark, a police officer parroting prejudiced instincts, and a bruised man with a shaky story. No fingerprints, no video, no weapon, nothing concrete, but none of it mattered. Judge Gregory Milton cleared his throat, his fingers drumming against the polished surface of the bench. He looked tired, or perhaps just bored, as if Alicia's life was an inconvenience in his already overbooked day. "Both sides have presented their arguments," he said, tone clipped. "The prosecution has established a timeline, witness statements, and supporting officer testimony." Alicia opened her mouth, ready to protest, to remind him that the timeline was speculative, the witness saw nothing definitive, and the officer's statements were dripping in bias. But before she could speak, he raised a hand. "There will be no further interruptions," he warned, not even looking at her. Merrick stood smugly beside his chair, arms crossed. He didn't have to say a word. He could already see the finish line. The verdict didn't need to be earned. It had been pre-written. "And though the defense has raised questions," the judge continued almost begrudgingly, "it is the role of the jury to assess whether the evidence meets the threshold of reasonable doubt." Alicia stood now, her voice calm but urgent. "Your Honor, if I may, this case is built on assumption. The only evidence they have is speculative at best. That does not meet the burden of proof." The judge glanced at her with that same condescending glare he'd worn from the first moment she introduced herself without counsel. "I've heard enough, Miss Monroe," he said sharply. "This court will now proceed to jury deliberation." It was a gut punch, a decision not made on fact, but fatigue. Alicia's breath caught in her throat as a low hum spread through the courtroom. She looked around, at the jury, some of whom refused to meet her eyes, at Merrick, who leaned in to whisper something smug to his assistant, at the spectators, many of whom wore that same look of, "She probably did it." She felt her knees weaken, but she didn't sit. She couldn't. The injustice wasn't just in what they did, it was in how easily they allowed it to happen. She had played by the rules. She had cross-examined, cited the Constitution, exposed flaws in every statement, but none of it mattered. The system didn't need to crush her with force. All it had to do was ignore her. Just when it seemed like all hope was slipping away, Alicia made one final move, one last shot at the truth. And this time, she came armed with proof they couldn't ignore. Or so she thought. ChatGPT said, "The courtroom was a pressure cooker. Every glance, every breath, every sound tightened the atmosphere by another turn." Alicia Monroe stood at the defense table with something clenched in her hand, a single piece of paper. She held it like it was her last weapon, the final bullet in a battle she'd been fighting alone since the moment she stepped into this courtroom. Her voice, clear and steady, sliced through the silence. "Your Honor," she said, lifting the paper, "this is a certified medical report from County General Hospital. It states that Mr. Charles Whitman was intoxicated the night of the incident. Blood alcohol level, 0.14, nearly twice the legal limit." A murmur shot through the spectators. Even the jury seemed momentarily startled, shifting in their seats, eyes darting from the paper to Alicia to the prosecution's table. Alicia stepped forward, handing the document to the bailiff, who carried it to the bench. Judge Milton scanned it briefly, his expression unreadable. Then, before Alicia could say another word, Daniel Merrick stood. With that same smug, practiced smirk plastered across his face, he turned to the jury and then to the judge. "Well, isn't that convenient?" he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. A medical report that just magically appears on the final day of trial, produced by a woman who has no legal team, no formal counsel, and no prior submission to discovery? He turned, taking a few slow steps toward Alicia, his hands clasped casually behind his back. Miss Monroe, he continued, where exactly did this document come from? You didn't submit it before the trial. You didn't mention it during cross-examination. So forgive me for asking, but did you type this up at home? Maybe used a hospital logo from Google? A wave of snickers spread through the courtroom like wildfire. The laughter was sharp, smug, cruel. It echoed off the walls, bouncing off the wood-paneled decor like bullets. Alicia's face didn't change. Her spine remained straight, but her fingers clenched tighter at her sides. This report, she said firmly, was obtained through proper channels. I requested it directly from the hospital's legal department. It's signed by a licensed attending physician. The timestamp matches the night of the incident. She looked at the judge. This evidence is critical. It changes the narrative completely. Mr. Whitman wasn't assaulted. He was drunk and stumbled. That explains the injuries. That undermines the foundation of their entire case. But Judge Milton didn't look impressed. He took off his glasses, pinched the bridge of his nose, and sighed heavily. Mr. Merrick is correct to question the timing, he said slowly. It's highly irregular to introduce new documents this late in the process, and without prior review. But Your Honor, Alicia interrupted, her voice rising just slightly for the first time. If the goal of this courtroom is truth, then you can't ignore evidence just because it's inconvenient. Judge Milton shot her a look that stopped the breath in her throat. Miss Monroe, he snapped, you will not lecture this court. She opened her mouth to speak again, but the judge slammed his gavel, once loud and final. Enough. The spectators were loving it. Some leaned forward, eager to see the arrogant self-defender put in her place. A few chuckled. One older man muttered, should have hired a lawyer, just loud enough for the people around him to hear. And Alicia, still standing, felt the weight settle onto her chest like a brick wall. She'd done everything right. She'd found the truth. She had it in her hands. But the system didn't want truth. The system wanted order, obedience, compliance. Merrick returned to his table, smiling like a man who'd just stepped on a flower, and called it justice. Your Honor, he said smoothly, given the document's late appearance and questionable chain of custody, I motion to disregard it entirely. Alicia turned quickly. You don't get to erase facts just because they don't fit your story. But the judge had already moved on. The motion is granted. The report will be excluded from the record. It was as if the world stopped spinning. Alicia's ears rang. Her arms felt numb. She looked at the jury. Half of them seemed confused, the other half indifferent. No one stood up for her. No one questioned the logic of dismissing key evidence because it arrived too late in a trial that hadn't even been fair from the start. It wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a stage, and the script had already been written. Alicia sat back down slowly. Her chair creaked under the sudden weight of silent fury. Her chest rose and fell, her face a mask of composure. But inside, she was on fire, because she knew this wasn't just about one report. It was about control, about power, about a system that bent over backward to preserve the illusion of fairness while quietly suffocating those who dared to speak without permission. She stared at the judge, who had already moved on to the next procedural note. And in that moment, Alicia Monroe understood something gut-wrenching. They weren't interested in the truth. They were interested in keeping her quiet. With her evidence dismissed, her objections ignored, and the weight of the courtroom stacked against her, Alicia realized there was only one thing left to do. Speak her truth, not for the court's approval, but for its reckoning. Alicia Monroe stood at the defense table, her face illuminated by a harsh beam of overhead light that felt more like interrogation than justice. She didn't ask for attention. She didn't raise her voice. But when she spoke, the room listened. Your Honor, she said softly but with unmistakable resolve. Before this court moves to deliberation, I'd like to address the jury. There was a pause, a moment of calculation from Judge Milton as he leaned back in his chair, the weight of the robe seeming to press heavier on him than usual. His fingers steepled. He didn't like her. That much was clear. but to deny her now after everything might look obvious. He gave a reluctant nod. You may proceed. Briefly, Alicia stepped forward, slowly, carefully, like walking through a minefield. Her heels tapped against the polished floor with quiet authority. She stopped at the center of the courtroom, directly between the prosecution and the jury, standing alone in a spotlight of judgment. She inhaled once, eyes sweeping across the jurors' faces. Some looked bored, some curious. One or two actually looked conflicted. My name is Alicia Monroe, she began, voice clear but raw. And for the past 3 days, I've stood here defending myself because no one else would. She paused, letting the words sink in. I've been talked over, dismissed, mocked. I've watched my rights twisted into weapons. I've seen evidence ignored and prejudice paraded as fact. Her voice cracked slightly, but it didn't waver. I'm not asking you for sympathy. I'm not asking for pity. I'm demanding what every person in this country is supposed to receive, a fair trial. She took a step closer to the jury box, locking eyes with a middle-aged woman on the front row, who immediately looked down. If I'm convicted today, it won't be because I assaulted anyone. It'll be because I didn't wear the right clothes, because I didn't have a lawyer, because I didn't smile enough, because I'm a black woman standing alone. Gasps rippled through the audience seats. Merrick shifted uncomfortably at his table. But Alicia didn't stop. If I had walked in here in a tailored Armani suit, white and well-connected, with a private legal team behind me, would I have been treated the same? She turned slightly, her voice rising, not in volume, but in purpose. Be honest with yourselves. If I were a white man in a $1,000 suit, would you have listened more carefully? Would you have asked more questions? Would you have doubted the shaky witness, questioned the biased officer, challenged the lack of hard evidence? She didn't blink. Or would you have needed less proof? A painful silence fell over the jury. A few of them couldn't meet her eyes. Others sat frozen, unable or unwilling to respond. One young juror, a man in his 20s, shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. A woman beside him wrung her hands beneath the edge of the wooden divider. You don't have to answer me, Alicia said, softer now, but you need to answer yourselves, because what happens in this room will echo far beyond me, beyond this case, beyond today. She drew in one final breath. Do not convict me because I didn't fit the picture of who you think deserves justice. Convict me only if you believe, beyond any reasonable doubt, that I committed this crime. She stepped back, her words still hanging in the air like gunpowder. Judge Milton's jaw was clenched. His fingers gripped the edge of the bench just a little too tightly. He waited a beat, 2, maybe 3, then finally spoke. Thank you, Miss Monroe, he said coldly. That's enough. No applause, no acknowledgement, just a gavel hitting wood like a bullet. This court is now in recess. The jury will retire to deliberate. Alicia didn't flinch. She returned to her seat in silence, but her words still echoed through the room, louder than any gavel ever could. The fight for justice is just beginning. More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know. Cornered, humiliated, and moments away from a verdict she didn't deserve, Alicia knew it was now or never. So she delivered her final, devastating blow. Just as the jury began to shift in their seats, preparing to rise for deliberation, Alicia Monroe stood. Her voice was clear, cutting through the tense air like a blade. Your Honor, I have new evidence, she announced, holding a flash drive in one hand and a sealed manila folder in the other. Judge Milton's eyes narrowed. This trial is moments away from closing. Unless it's earth-shattering, you are dangerously close to contempt. Alicia didn't flinch. It is earth-shattering. It's the truth, finally caught on camera. She turned to the bailiff and handed over the flash drive. Security footage from the convenience store adjacent to the parking lot. It was only recently recovered from their archive. The timestamp places it at the exact moment of the alleged incident. The bailiff brought the drive to the clerk, who quickly connected it to the courtroom monitor. The screen flickered. Everyone watched. What appeared was grainy but clear enough. The camera overlooked the rear of the parking lot, dimly lit and shadowed, but unmistakable in its scope. At 9:32 p.m., a man, Charles Whitman, stumbled into frame. He was alone. He swayed, clearly unstable. In his right hand, a half-finished beer can. Moments later, Alicia appeared on screen, several feet away, walking toward her car without urgency. Then suddenly, Whitman slipped, his foot landing squarely on a crushed aluminum can that rolled under his weight. His legs buckled, his body slammed to the pavement. Alicia turned at the sound but didn't rush over. She stood still, clearly startled as Whitman moaned and rolled onto his side. There was no contact, no confrontation, no assault. The room went silent, deadly silent. Alicia stepped forward. Exhibit A. She then held up the manila envelope. This is a certified medical report from County General Hospital. It verifies that Mr. Whitman suffered minor abrasions consistent with a fall, not an assault. There were no defensive wounds, no blunt force trauma, and no signs of external impact. Judge Milton looked down at the report after the bailiff placed it on his bench. He scanned it with furrowed brows, flipping through the notarized pages, silence thickening the room with each passing second. And then came the final blow. Alicia turned to the back of the courtroom. Your Honor, I'd like to call one final witness. He arrived just moments ago. The side door opened. A man in a security uniform stepped into the room. Tall, middle-aged, nervous, but determined. This is Kenneth Dawes, Alicia said. He's the night shift security guard for the building adjacent to the parking lot. He witnessed the entire event but was never contacted by investigators. Judge Milton sighed. We are beyond the timeline for new witnesses. Alicia pressed on. Please, you just watched a man fall on his own. This testimony will confirm it. After a long pause, Milton finally waved the man to the stand. Kenneth sat down, swore his oath, and adjusted the mic with trembling fingers. Mr. Dawes, Alicia asked gently, were you working on the night of September 12th? Yes, I monitor the back lot from the building's loading dock. I smoke out there. I've seen it all. Did you witness what happened between me and Mr. Whitman? Dawes nodded slowly. Yeah, he was already tipsy when he showed up, arguing with someone on the phone, loud. Then I saw him toss an empty beer can on the ground. He took a step, slipped on another can, and just wiped out. Did I touch him? Never. Did you see me assault him? You just stood there. Honestly, you looked more surprised than anyone. Merrick leapt to his feet. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. None of this was in the discovery process. This is a stunt. Your Honor, he began, his voice sharp and clipped. This submission is inadmissible. The defense has failed to present this evidence during the discovery process. Introducing such material at this late stage violates procedural fairness and denies the prosecution a chance to properly vet its authenticity. He turned to the jury, deliberately pacing. This is not how justice works. A courtroom is not a magic show where surprises are pulled from hats at the 11th hour. There are rules for a reason: structure, process, discipline, and this, he gestured toward the video screen in the medical report, is chaos, unverified, untimely, unacceptable. There were murmurs of agreement among some courtroom observers, but Alicia Monroe remained stone still. She didn't blink, didn't shift. She stood at the center of the room, the eye of the storm, and when she spoke, it was with the razor-sharp precision of a woman who had waited too long to be heard. Your Honor, she began, her voice unwavering, the prosecution is right about one thing. There are rules, but what he failed to mention is that those rules are meant to serve justice, not convenience. Her words hung in the air, slicing through the tension like a scalpel. The reason this evidence wasn't presented earlier is because I didn't have a team of investigators combing the scene. I didn't have subpoena power or a forensic unit at my disposal. I'm one person, alone, fighting a system designed to break people who can't afford to fight back. She stepped toward the jury box, her voice growing louder, not shouting but with a power that demanded attention. But let me ask this. Why didn't they find this evidence? Why didn't the prosecution pull security footage from the store next door? Why didn't they interview the building security guard who stood less than 20 feet away when the alleged incident occurred. Why didn't they confirm whether Mr. Whitman had been drinking? She turned slowly to face Merrick, her eyes locked on his. I'll tell you why. Because they weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for a conviction. Gasps echoed throughout the room. A few jurors glanced at each other. Others looked down, clearly uncomfortable. They built a narrative, Alicia continued, her voice hardening, one that fit the easiest, laziest explanation. Black woman, alone, no lawyer, must be guilty. She turned back to the judge. And now that the truth is inconvenient, now that the facts contradict their assumptions, they want it silenced. Merrick stepped forward, flustered now. Objection! This is a speech, not a legal argument. But Alicia didn't stop. They had weeks, Your Honor, weeks to investigate, to dig deeper. They didn't. I had days. I did. And I found what they refused to see. The judge's face was unreadable. He tapped his pen against the bench, staring at the video still frozen on the screen. Charles Whitman, slipping, arms flailing, no one touching him. Alicia took a final breath, her voice lowering, almost whispering. If justice means anything in this room, then this evidence cannot be ignored, not because of when it arrived, but because of what it reveals. The truth doesn't expire just because it arrives late. The courtroom fell silent once more. Merrick opened his mouth, then closed it again, visibly rattled. His arguments, once bolstered by performance and legal polish, now seemed brittle in the face of hard, undeniable truth. Judge Milton stared down at the stack of evidence before him. The surveillance footage, the certified medical report, and the sworn testimony of the surprise witness who had just rocked the prosecution's entire case. His fingers tapped once, twice against the bench, as if trying to summon clarity from chaos. Everyone waited. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, reluctant, but unmistakably clear. This court acknowledges that the new materials presented are highly relevant to the case at hand, he said. The surveillance video directly contradicts the prosecution's account of events. The medical report supports the claim that no physical assault took place, and the witness testimony corroborates both. Alicia didn't move. She didn't smile. She had no reason to celebrate, not yet. This wasn't victory. This was survival. The judge continued, his tone tinged with a reluctant gravitas. While the timing of this submission is far from ideal, it is the court's responsibility to ensure that no verdict is rendered without a full and fair examination of the facts. He looked up, meeting Alicia's eyes for the first time without disdain. This evidence will be admitted. A collective gasp passed through the room like a sudden gust of wind. From the prosecution table, Daniel Merrick stiffened, his jaw twitching as his carefully constructed case began to crumble. For days, he had relied on vague witness accounts, biased assumptions, and the court's willingness to look past the absence of concrete proof. Now that entire foundation had been shattered in a matter of minutes. But even as the gavel came down to formalize the decision, Alicia remained still, because the reality hadn't changed. Not truly. This courtroom had never been neutral ground. It had been a battlefield where she was expected to lose gracefully, and now that she had disrupted the script, people were scrambling to recover their roles. The judge's voice broke the silence once more. The jury will reconvene after 30 minutes for final instructions and deliberation. 30 minutes had passed, though it felt like hours. The jury had filed out in silence, leaving the courtroom in a suffocating stillness. Alicia Monroe sat alone at the defense table, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Around her, the gallery murmured in hushed tones. The weight of the moment pressed down on every surface, every breath. This was the final act, but no one could predict how it would end. The door at the back creaked open. All conversation ceased. The 12 jurors re-entered, single file, with measured steps and guarded expressions. No one smiled. No one fidgeted. They took their seats with the solemnity of people who had just stared down something heavy, something real. The foreperson, a woman in her 40s with silver streaks in her hair, held a folded slip of paper in her hand. Her fingers trembled just slightly. Alicia didn't blink. She didn't move. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her posture remained rigid, unbroken. She had come this far, through mockery, through systemic doubt, through a trial that felt more like an execution than a search for truth. She wasn't sure what justice looked like anymore, but she knew what injustice felt like. She had lived it. Judge Milton cleared his throat, visibly tense now. His once commanding presence seemed smaller, uncertain. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson stood. We have, Your Honor. The bailiff stepped forward, took the paper from her hand, and delivered it to the judge. Milton read it. His eyes didn't move. His lips didn't twitch. He was a man who had expected one ending, and now the script had changed. He exhaled sharply and handed the paper back to the bailiff. Will the defendant please rise? Alicia stood. Time slowed. Every camera in the gallery focused in. Every eye watched. Even Daniel Merrick, the prosecutor who had once looked so smug, so invincible, now sat pale-faced, frozen like a man watching his empire collapse in real time. The foreperson cleared her throat. Her voice wavered for a second, but found strength. In the matter of the People versus Alicia Monroe, she began, on the charge of felony assault. Alicia's breath caught. 1 second stretched into eternity. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. For a heartbeat, no one reacted. Then the sound hit, like a dam breaking. Gasps, whispers, stunned silence quickly overtaken by a wave of murmurs. The spectators, who had spent the trial scoffing and doubting, now stared with disbelief. Some looked down in shame. Some avoided Alicia's gaze altogether. But one thing was clear. The lie had unraveled, and they had witnessed it. Daniel Merrick sat still, his jaw slack, his face drained of color. He didn't object. He didn't stand. He simply looked broken. The certainty he'd carried so confidently through every word of his case had turned to dust in the span of one sentence. Judge Milton blinked once, twice, as if trying to make sense of what had just happened. This court thanks the jury for their service, he said slowly, mechanically. You are hereby dismissed. He didn't look at Alicia. Not once. The gavel came down like a reluctant surrender. Alicia exhaled, but she didn't collapse. She didn't cry. She stood tall. Not because she hadn't been hurt, but because she refused to let the system see her broken. A woman in the gallery clapped once, tentatively, then another. Then the room began to stir, not with celebration, but with realization. They had almost convicted an innocent woman. They had almost let the system swallow her whole, and it had taken every ounce of her strength, intelligence, and courage just to survive. Merrick finally stood. He looked at Alicia across the courtroom, not with apology, not even with hate, but with something far more dangerous, confusion, as if he still couldn't understand how the story hadn't ended the way he'd planned. Alicia turned and walked out of the courtroom. The heavy courtroom doors creaked open as Alicia Monroe stepped into the hallway, the air outside the chamber feeling somehow thinner, freer, but no less intense. The verdict still echoed in her ears. Not guilty, yet the battle scars remained fresh on her face, in her posture, and deep within her chest. It was over, yes, but the war she'd been forced to fight alone had left its mark. The moment she crossed the threshold, the flash of cameras exploded like a wave of white heat. Microphones lunged toward her. Reporters swarmed, some shouting questions, others holding back with wide-eyed awe. The hallway, once cold and sterile, had become a frenzy of movement and noise. Miss Monroe, how does it feel to be exonerated? Did you ever think the jury would side with you? Do you believe the justice system failed you? She kept walking, calm and poised, as if she hadn't just stood trial for a crime she didn't commit, as if she hadn't nearly been crushed under the weight of a courtroom built on quiet bias and loud procedure. Her silence was stronger than any speech. Then one voice cut through the noise. A young reporter, no more than 25, his suit too big for his frame, but his tone eager. Miss Monroe, he called out, after what you just endured, would you consider studying law? Maybe become a lawyer? Alicia stopped. The crowd quieted. Cameras focused, microphones stretched even closer. She turned to face the reporter, her eyes sharp yet not unkind. And then, with a calm that silenced even the furthest corner of the hallway, she answered. I already did, she said. I'm a U.S. attorney. For a second, no one reacted. The words hovered in the air like a suspended verdict. Unbelievable, undeniable. I've prosecuted organized crime, she continued. I've stood in federal courtrooms. I've cross-examined drug lords and white-collar criminals with more money than God. The crowd froze. But this, she said, her voice tightening with emotion, this was the first time I stood in a courtroom completely alone. No title, no badge, no team, just me. Her eyes scanned the press, then turned toward the courtroom doors behind her. And I had to ask myself, if I didn't have a resume, if I didn't carry a title, if I wasn't someone with status, would I have been heard at all? Gasps swept the crowd like a cold wind. Murmurs rippled. Someone dropped a notebook. Another whispered, "Did she say U.S. Attorney?" Inside the courtroom, the noise seeped through the door. Judge Milton had paused mid-sentence, his pen frozen in his hand. Daniel Merrick stood speechless, the reality of what he had just done, or nearly done, hitting him like a tidal wave of shame. Outside, Alicia wasn't finished. If I hadn't fought every second of this trial, if I hadn't uncovered the footage myself, if I hadn't called that witness, tracked that medical report, stood up again and again while the system tried to shut me down, would any of you be standing here now, asking me questions, or would you have walked away the moment the cuffs clicked around my wrists? There was no triumph in her voice, only truth. Undeniable, uncompromising. I wanted to see what the system looked like when I was stripped of everything except my voice. And I saw it, all of it. She stepped forward, the wall of reporters parting without hesitation. And now you've seen it too. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Not because Alicia had just revealed her identity, but because she had revealed theirs. Their assumptions, their doubt, their failure to question a single narrative until the woman they'd nearly written off forced them to see her. Alicia didn't wait for another question. She didn't need to. She walked away, head held high, past the cameras, past the questions, past the reporters who now stood stunned in the hallway, like statues in a museum of misplaced judgment. Justice had spoken in the courtroom, but Alicia Monroe had delivered the real verdict, and it was unforgettable. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. Alicia Monroe stepped through the glass doors of her downtown office, exhaustion pulling at her shoulders like invisible weights. The familiar chaos inside felt distant, muted somehow, as if her previous courtroom battle had drained all color from the world. But before she could even place her bag down, Jasmine, her assistant, hurried forward, a thick manila folder in hand, worry etched across her young face. "Alicia, this just came in," Jasmine said urgently, pushing the file into Alicia's hands. "A woman named Elena Carter, single mother, 2 kids, about to lose her apartment despite never missing a rent payment." Alicia opened the folder slowly, scanning the pages. Her pulse quickened. Rent receipts, eviction notices. Each page screamed injustice. Jasmine watched her quietly, then whispered softly, "They're forcing her out for a new luxury development. She's not alone. Dozens of families, Alicia." Alicia's jaw tightened, a familiar fire reigniting in her eyes. "Who's behind this?" Jasmine hesitated briefly. "Walker Properties, deep connections, city council, the police, even the courts." Alicia lifted her eyes from the file, her voice low but powerful. "Then it's time someone stood up to them." Within hours, Alicia sat across from Elena Carter in a tiny coffee shop, steam rising from untouched cups. Elena's trembling fingers wrapped around a bundle of documents, her voice shaking as she explained, "I did everything right, paid on time, kept the place spotless. But then they came, threats in hand, and told me I had 30 days. My babies have nowhere else to go." Alicia reached across the table, steadying Elena's shaking hand. "You're not alone anymore, trust me." In the days that followed, Alicia uncovered the depth of corruption with ruthless efficiency. She visited neighbors, knocked on doors, stayed awake long past midnight studying decades of real estate records. Every paper trail led to the same truth. Powerful interests conspiring to evict working-class families, replacing homes with gleaming towers that sparkled with greed. Yet with every step closer to the truth, resistance intensified. Late one night, Alicia's phone rang. A distorted voice whispered threats through the static, chilling her to the bone. "You're digging too deep, Monroe. Back off, or else." She hung up, heart racing, but the threat only strengthened her resolve. The next morning, Alicia walked into court, armed with evidence and an unwavering determination. "I'm filing a class action lawsuit against Walker Properties on behalf of Elena Carter and 47 other families illegally targeted and evicted," she declared before the judge, her voice clear and unyielding. "We have proof of systematic fraud, threats, and corruption involving city officials." Walker's attorneys fought viciously, smearing Alicia in newspapers, painting her as a troublemaker, exploiting vulnerable residents for personal glory. Anonymous notes appeared at her doorstep. Her car tires slashed. Still, Alicia did not waver. She fought back with facts, each meticulously gathered document forming an undeniable truth. One stormy evening, as she sorted files alone in her office, a shadow fell across the doorway. She glanced up sharply. Detective Reynolds stood there, face somber. "You're stirring up powerful enemies, Alicia," Reynolds warned. "They'll stop at nothing to silence you." "Then let them try," Alicia shot back defiantly, "because I won't let these families be crushed beneath their greed." Reynolds sighed deeply, handing her a flash drive. "This proves it all. Bank transfers, bribes to police chiefs, city council payouts. Take them down." In court, the revelations detonated like bombs, shattering the veneer of legitimacy Walker Properties had carefully crafted. Bank statements showed massive payments exchanged for evictions. Emails detailed systematic manipulation between city officials, law enforcement, and developers. The corruption web unraveled spectacularly, piece by piece, leaving the jury visibly stunned. Alicia delivered her closing argument with passionate intensity. "This case isn't just about Elena Carter. It's about every family torn apart by powerful men who believe laws don't apply to them. It's about people deemed disposable simply because they lack wealth or status. Justice must never be reserved for the highest bidder." When the jury returned, every eye in the courtroom fixed upon them. The four persons stood, delivering the verdict with trembling hands yet unshakable clarity. "We find Walker Properties liable on all counts. We award damages to the plaintiffs and order an immediate halt to all evictions and construction projects." Alicia's heart soared. Around her, the families cheered, wept openly, embracing one another. Elena Carter clung to Alicia's arm, her tears mixing with relieved laughter. For one moment, hope overshadowed injustice. The fallout came swiftly. Walker's CEO arrested. City officials resigned in disgrace. Police chiefs investigated. Newspapers headlined "Corruption Exposed," praising Alicia as the hero who'd toppled giants. Yet amid the celebration, Alicia stood quietly, gaze distant. Cameras flashed relentlessly as reporters swarmed, eager for a triumphant speech. One journalist stepped forward, microphone raised, asking eagerly, "Ms. Monroe, after exposing corruption at this scale, you're hailed as a hero. How does it feel to become famous overnight?" Alicia paused, her eyes meeting Elena Carter's gaze in the crowd, the woman who trusted her with everything. Then she turned back to the cameras, speaking calmly but resolutely. "I never wanted fame. Fame fades. Fame distracts. All I wanted, what I still want, is real justice. Because justice isn't a headline or a photo op. Justice is dignity restored, homes protected, families safe. If we forget that, all of this means nothing." The silence afterwards spoke louder than any applause. Weeks later, citywide investigations unfolded. Alicia's courage inspired whistleblowers to come forward, dismantling networks of corruption that had hidden comfortably behind closed doors. Elena Carter and countless others stayed in their homes, building lives unthreatened by greed. Late one evening, Alicia stood by her office window overlooking the city, quiet streets reflecting softly in the glow of street lamps. Jasmine stepped in gently, hesitant to disturb. "Alicia, you did it. You changed everything." Alicia smiled faintly, eyes still fixed on the world beyond the glass. We changed it, Jasmine. Together. Her assistant nodded thoughtfully. They're calling you fearless now. Alicia shook her head gently, turning to face her assistant fully. Fearless? Courage doesn't come from being fearless. It comes from deciding something matters more than your fear. Outside, rain began to fall softly, cleansing the city streets below. Alicia knew this fight was far from over. But tonight, the storm had passed. And for now, justice had found its voice. Strong, clear, and undeniable. The courtroom doors closed behind Alicia Monroe, their heavy echo resonating through the empty corridor. She stood for a moment, her breathing steady yet heavy, as if the very air around her had thickened. The silence wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, a stark reminder of the battles she'd fought. The weight of every prejudiced stare, every dismissive remark, every assumption of guilt that had nearly broken her spirit. She had won, yet victory had not erased the scars. Alicia stepped forward slowly, the soles of her shoes clicking softly against the polished marble. Her reflection glanced back at her from the pristine glass panels lining the hallway. Strong yet weary, resolute yet vulnerable. In that moment, her reflection was more than just a physical mirror. It was the reflection of every marginalized voice silenced by power, wealth, and prejudice. She paused near a tall window, looking down upon the city streets below, crowded with people oblivious to the life-altering battle that had unfolded mere feet away. Below her stood a society, its traffic moving like clockwork, seemingly orderly yet riddled with hidden injustices. Alicia knew intimately how easily the mechanisms of power could crush those without a voice, without resources, without status. She remembered vividly how close she had come to losing everything, not because of guilt or wrongdoing, but simply because of who society saw when they looked at her. A black woman without legal counsel, a defendant representing herself, underestimated, mocked, ignored. Every step had been a climb uphill, dragging chains of bias heavier than iron. Alicia Monroe had been an attorney, a federal prosecutor no less. Yet none of that prestige had mattered when stripped of her title. Without her badge of status, the system had tried its hardest to silence her. If even someone like her, who knew the rules in the game, could be so easily dismissed, what chance did others stand? She pressed her palm against the cold glass, her fingers trembling slightly, betraying the emotion she had fought hard to keep contained. Today's victory wasn't just personal, it carried a deeper meaning, a haunting revelation about society's fundamental flaw. Justice was not blind. It saw clearly, discriminated openly, judging first by wealth, power, and skin color, and only afterward by truth or evidence. She knew this was a lesson she could never forget, one she must ensure others learned too. This case, these weeks spent fighting alone against an unjust system, had not simply exposed flaws in the legal process, it had revealed a hidden disease at the very heart of humanity. Prejudice and injustice thrived not in shadows, but in plain sight, protected by complacency, shielded by privilege. Alicia drew a slow breath, turning away from the window as footsteps approached her from behind. Jasmine, her assistant, approached quietly, eyes wide with respect, pride, and a hint of sadness. "You did it, Alicia. You changed things. People are already talking," Jasmine said softly. Alicia nodded slowly. "But will they remember? Or will this moment fade? Just another headline quickly forgotten." Jasmine looked at her thoughtfully. "You showed them truth. That can't fade, not easily." Alicia met her assistant's earnest gaze. "But truth alone is fragile. It needs guardians, people brave enough to defend it, even when it costs everything." She stepped closer, conviction clear in every movement, every word. "What happened to me happens every day to people who can't fight back, who don't have cameras following their stories, who don't get dramatic courtroom victories. They simply disappear into the cracks. Justice should never depend on fame, money, or status. It must be universal, or it is worthless." Her voice echoed softly in the corridor, quiet yet fierce, laden with a depth of emotion only those who truly suffered injustice could grasp. Alicia felt her heartbeat quicken as a newfound mission crystallized in her mind. A duty not only to fight for those silenced, but to make society recognize its own biases, its own injustices. We must fight every injustice as if it's our own, she continued quietly, yet with intensity. Because in reality it is. When justice fails one person, it fails us all. Every false accusation, every innocent silenced, every judgment clouded by prejudice is a wound in the collective soul of humanity. Jasmine nodded, listening intently, moved by the clarity and power in Alicia's voice. The trial today was not just about me, Alicia pressed on, her voice rising in passionate determination. It was a trial of the system itself, a system that so easily discards those it considers weak or inconvenient. And the system failed, not because it wanted truth, but because it underestimated someone it thought powerless. But not everyone can fight back as I did, and that is the tragedy. Alicia felt an urgency now, an almost physical force compelling her forward. Her hands clenched into fists, driven by the memory of every dismissive glance, every mocking laugh in the courtroom. Today must be more than just a victory for Alicia Monroe, she said fiercely. It must become a call to action, a challenge to every one of us to demand better, to dismantle prejudice, to hold power accountable, and to insist on justice that is truly blind. She paused, her voice dropping to a raw whisper, her eyes glistening with unspilled tears of resolve. We must recognize our responsibility to speak for those who cannot, to fight for justice not because it is easy or convenient, but because it is right, because silence is complicity and passivity is acceptance. In that silence, Alicia's words echoed like thunder, reverberating through Jasmine in the empty hallway. The young assistant's eyes filled with tears, moved deeply by the profound strength and vulnerability of her mentor. What you endured, Jasmine finally whispered, was unforgivable, yet you stood strong. Now they see. They have to see. Alicia gently placed a hand on Jasmine's shoulder, smiling softly, her expression bittersweet yet powerful. They see now, yes, but tomorrow we must remind them again. And again after that, because true justice is not a single victory, it's continuous vigilance. It demands courage every single day. She stepped forward, shoulders squared, strength radiating from her presence. The courtroom behind her had been a battlefield, but the war for justice was far from over. It was just beginning. Alicia Monroe knew now what her life had become: a living testament, a voice for those unheard, a beacon for those cast aside. And as she walked down that long corridor, her steps resolute, eyes forward, Alicia knew that no matter how challenging, how exhausting, or how isolating the journey ahead might become, she could never turn away. Because justice, real justice, was not about headlines or glory. It was about dignity, humanity, and truth. And that fight would always be worth every sacrifice, every battle, every hardship. She paused once more at the exit, glancing back toward the courtroom. In her heart, Alicia felt the weight of responsibility more intensely than ever before. Yet it was a weight she now embraced willingly, knowing what truly mattered. She opened the doors to the bright sunlight beyond, stepping boldly forward into a world that still needed her strength, her voice, and her unwavering courage. Because as long as injustice existed, Alicia Monroe knew exactly where she needed to be. Right here, fighting with everything she had. If Alicia's journey touched your heart, if her courage against injustice stirred something deep within you, then now is your moment to make your voice heard. Stories like hers matter because they highlight the struggles so many face quietly, hidden behind courtroom doors and systemic barriers. They remind us that justice isn't something we wait for. It's something we must actively demand. Every like you leave on this video amplifies Alicia's message of fairness and equality. It tells the world that you too stand against bias, corruption, and prejudice. Each comment you share lets us know how her fight resonated with you personally. Did you feel angry, inspired, empowered? Your voice matters, and your words can inspire others to take a stand. Subscribing to this channel means joining a community dedicated to truth, justice, and powerful storytelling. Here, every story seeks not just to entertain, but to ignite change, spark meaningful conversations, and challenge the silence surrounding injustice. By subscribing, you're standing alongside Alicia and everyone like her, showing them they are not alone. So please hit the like button, drop a comment below about your feelings, your thoughts, or your own experiences with injustice. And don't forget to subscribe to keep these vital conversations alive. Click the notification bell because every story deserves to be told, heard, and remembered. Together, we have the power to ensure that courage never goes unnoticed and that justice never becomes silent. Join us today because change starts here with you.